Riding around Limgrave, the Tarnished will likely find themselves in an area filled with lots of trees and thick shrubbery. This is the Mistwood, and besides the scary rune bears that are in plentiful numbers, most of the things in this area look like they belong in a forest. For example, the golden shining minor Erdtree, or some runes scattered around. There is one location here in the Mistwood though that seems to stand out. Next to a big rune bear scratching his claws against the bark of a tree, a circular shaped building of high quality sits, oozing with curiosity. Entering, it becomes clear that this building contains an elevator, and going down, it's obvious that this is no ordinary elevator, as it seems imbued with a sort of magic. The journey downwards is one of those special moments in Elden Ring, as the setting and feeling totally changes. Peering outwards, the Tarnished can see a brand new location, an entirely new city sparking desires to explore it. I can say from personal experience that this was one of the coolest moments in the game, and I knew from the get-go that this was an area that wanted to be explored. However, upon reaching the bottom, the Tarnished is nowhere near the city seen on the trip downwards, and actually there is no way of reaching it from here. I will note that the area down here, the Shifa River, belongs in a separate video with its own lore and detail to be analysed in the future. In order to reach this area that houses the mysterious city, the Tarnished will need to defeat Starscourge Radahn first. His mastery of gravity magic allowed him to hold back the stars, and so defeating him causes a falling star to smash into the lands between. Coincidentally, the star manages to smash in the Mistwood area, near the Shifa River elevator. The crumbling rocks from the impact site float in the sky, entangled in a field of gravity, indicating the high amounts of energy the falling star contained, and a testament to General Radahn's prowess. I wonder what awaits us below the crater. Progressing onwards, we see a familiar sight, the elevator we went down earlier, and most importantly, the immensely intriguing Nokron Eternal City. It is immediately clear that the city has become a relic for a long lost time. No longer in its prime, Nokron is in the first stages of becoming an ancient civilization. A sister city can also be found, named Nokstella, which we'll be looking into as well. Most of the inhabitants are long gone, presumably dead, and it is this mysterious nature of the Eternal Cities which make them so interesting. In this video, we will explore the last remnants of both cities, how their downfall came about, and what was the reason for the destruction of the entire civilization. Entering Nokron is actually a bit of a struggle. This is because the main part of the city has been cut off, and so the Tarnished must tread carefully on parts of buildings that seem to have sunken into the rock below, or have toppled over completely. What has caused such destruction to such a beautiful looking area? Black blobs, known as silver tears, are spread out across the fallen buildings, making the platforming even trickier. Moving onwards and getting our first look at a mostly undamaged part of the city does not come without risk. We encounter a band of white, fleshy pale gremlin-like creatures. These creatures now wander the ruins of this civilization, digging and searching for precious items in the rubble. There are several item descriptions that give us information as to who these beings are. The Great Shield Soldier Ash's description reads that the creatures belonged to the Fallen Hawks, a band of soldiers that once explored the Eternal City, stout defenders with a steady guard. So they were a skilled group of soldiers, but this doesn't tell us much, other than it's possible they didn't look so ghoulish before. Well, near the beginning area of Nokron, we can actually find a ghost flame torch, the same one that some of the Fallen Hawks carry with them. We learn from the item description that the metal torch burns with cold ghost flame. When the band's last embers were used up in their long search, they began to burn the bones of their fellows, acquiring the cold ghost flame, but sealing their fate as dwellers of the underground for all eternity. This must be the explanation for why the Fallen Hawk's appearance is so ghastly. They used the ghost flame in order to be able to see in the dark, but at the cost of their intellect, and as such, they remain cursed to wander the ruins of Nokron forever. This still does not explain why they are even in one of the Eternal Cities. Well, Nokron is commonly described as an ancient city that was punished for high treason against the greater will. A very serious thing indeed. We will find out together later what this treason was, but for now, the Fallen Hawks must have been ordered to investigate the eternal city of Nokron after its destruction. I speculate that the Greater Will wanted to know what had become of its inhabitants and the city itself, or to destroy some of the precious relics which we will discover are very dangerous towards the order of the Greater Will. This might explain why we find some of the Fallen Hawks fruitlessly digging in the ruins of the city. Nevertheless, the Fallen Hawks have become demented ghouls who have failed in their mission and are now doomed to die along with the Eternal City. To get to the main part of the city, we must first traverse some ancient ruins. 2 obstacles block our path, the first being a Nox sorceress. This is our first contact with what is presumably the original inhabitants of the Eternal Cities, a quick and sneaky enemy who are part of a cold-blooded race known as the Nox. The item description of their armor reads that the Nox invoked the ire of the Greater Will and were banished deep underground. Now they live under a false night sky, in eternal anticipation of their liege, of the coming age of the stars, and their Lord of Night. Now we truly understand why the Greater Will were at odds with the Nox. The Nox wanted to remove the Golden Order, the influence of the Fingers, and ultimately the Greater Will. It seems they wanted to create a new age for the inhabitants of the lands between, the same age of stars that Ranni the Witch wants, and that the Tarnished can actually choose as an ending. The Nox were attempting this change of power above the ground, and when the Greater Will caught word of it, they banished them underground, so as to take away the real night sky, and prevent any of this treasonous ploy from being carried out. The Nox did not stop though, as underneath in the depths of the lands between, they created a false night sky, in order to still have some interaction with the moon and stars. Later on, we will explore that the Greater Will chose the nuclear option in dealing with the Eternal Cities and the Nox race, since even with their night sky taken from them, it did not stop the Nox in stubbornly pursuing their ambitions. Past our first encounter with the Nox, a boss battle awaits us, and it is one of the more interesting bosses in the game. The boss is actually a mimic of our own character, moulded from a silver tear, and after defeating it, I couldn't help but laugh at the funny messages on the ground, which read, "Didn't expect weak foe, therefore introspection required." Anyways, this mimic provides us further information into our investigation of the ancient cities. It is described to us from the silver tear husk crafting item found across Nokron that the silver tear makes mockery of life, reborn again and again into imitation. Perhaps one day it will be reborn a lord. This is exactly why the mimic was created by the Nox. The mimic tears are an attempt by the Eternal City to forge a lord. This is the Lord of Night that I mentioned earlier, and I presume it's in similar status to the Elden Lord. The key difference being that the Lord of Night is to help bring on a new age of stars. However, it is stated that the mimic tears failed to imitate the summoner's will, and so the Nox was successful in creating an artificial life form, but they failed to produce anything with its own free-thinking capabilities. Despite this, the creation of the mimic tears is nothing to be frowned upon, and illustrates the high intellectual capabilities of the Nox race, and foreshadows the many other treasures that we will find in the Eternal Cities. Possibly with more time, the Nox could have been successful in artificially creating their Lord of Night. Before wrapping up this first section, I will add that the area in which this boss battle takes place, I believe, has no relation to the Nox people and the Eternal Cities. This architecture is completely different to the buildings found in the Eternal Cities. I am of the opinion that due to this, these ruins are actually from a much more ancient civilization called the Ul, which could have roots tracing back to before the age of the Erd Tree. Past the woods inhabited by the ancestral followers, we reach what seems to have been the hub of Nokron. Nokron was clearly a majestic city, and one can only imagine how it looked like in its heyday. Among the rooftops of the buildings are the dead inhabitants of the city, fixed in time, and they seem to have died in great agony. What sort of entity or creature could have caused such a painful downfall of the city? Celestial Dew, a type of potion, can be found among the rooftops, and is also present in Nokstella. There's a reason Celestial Dew is in plentiful supply amongst the Eternal Cities. The item description reads that once upon a time, the stars of the night sky guided fate, and this is a recollection of those times. Therefore, it seems that the Nox created Celestial Dew as a way of trying to remove the influence of the Greater Will in their lives. In the cathedral, more Nox sorcerers roam, with one of them praying in front of the chest where the Tarnished finds the Mimic Tear ashes, implying that the ashes were of great importance for their mission, as we already know. Standing on a cliff near a lost site of grace, I get the impression that the Eternal Cities, especially Nokron, were actually massive and possibly spanned across the whole underground area. The Nokron and Nokstella we see now is a shell of what it once was. At the end of the city's playable area lies a giant skeleton who sits on a throne. Little is known about these big skeleton creatures. One is also found in Nokstella. They were most likely the leaders of their respective cities, also possibly acting as vassals for their respective god, the outer god of moon and stars, like what the Two Fingers are to the Greater Will. This might explain why we see all the dead bodies gazing upon their leader in anguish and confusion, looking for the solution to their problems. The amount of silver tears found here also indicate that this gigantic figure was certainly someone of importance within the Nox dynasty. Below this giant creature is the most prized treasure of all, the Fingerslayer blade. The hidden treasure of the eternal city of Nokron, this blood-drenched fetish is proof of the high treason committed by the eternal city and symbolizes its downfall. Cannot be wielded by those without a fate, but is said to be able to harm the Greater Will and its vassals. The Nox had the perfect weapon to remove the Greater Will's influence over the lands between, but since they struggled to create a Lord of Night to wield it, the weapon remained dormant. Before the blade could be used, the Greater Will found this high treason and understood that simply banishing the Nox underground was not sufficient in preventing their treasonous actions. It seems that the Nox were very close in achieving their Age of Stars, but we will find out exactly how the Greater Will reacted, and suffice to say, it was without mercy. Before we find out what the Greater Will's second and final punishment of the Nox people was, let us briefly explore Nokstella. Since Nokstella is a sister city of Nokron, most of the same things can be found here. For example, they have their own giant skeleton figure, like in Nokron. However, this one is guarded by a dragon kin soldier, a faithful being to the end, guarding its creators even despite their deaths taking place long ago. None of the fallen hawks are found in Nokstella, indicating that they only got as far as Nokron due to losing their minds to the cold ghost flame. Nokstella is described as being infested with enemies, and this is true. Unlike in Nokron, where the city mostly is inhabited by the few Nox left, here in Nokstella, giant ants roam around, with some of the Nox even riding upon their backs. In its prime, I doubt Nokstella would have tolerated these pests, and so the giant ants must have found their way here once the city was in ruins. The thing found here of greatest importance is the Moon of Nokstella talisman, a legendary talisman representing the lost black moon. The Moon of Nokstella was a guide of countless stars. After being banished underground, the Nox had no way to communicate or interact with their beloved moon, and so they created a false night sky in both of the Eternal Cities. Nokstella seemed to house this underground moon, and I presume it took on a darker appearance due to existing in an artificial sky underground. The moon must have also been destroyed or vanquished, since it's nowhere to be found in the ruined Nokstella. So what caused such destruction of Nokron and Nokstella? What did the Greater Will do, and what did they send underground? Making our way past Nokstella through the putrid lake of rot to the Grand Cloister, a coffin awaiting to transport us down into the very depths of the lands between is found. Taking the coffin down the waterfall, we find ourselves in a dark cavern. I wonder what awaits us ahead. Walking through the fog wall, we are met with a monster that clearly has no place in this world. It is a weird amalgamation of a long, colourful and spiky tail, several wings, and a scary face with two large horns on its cheeks. The very sight of this foe is enough to make one shudder. He is named Astel, natural born of the void. Astel's remembrance reads that he is a creature born from the void who assailed an eternal city and stole their sky. This malformed star of ill omen possesses immense power over gravity and the stars, and so in a cruel twist of irony, the very stars in the false night sky that the Nox worshipped are the same place where Astel originated from, and lay waste to the eternal city of Nokron. I believe that you can actually find the ground zero area where Astel made his entrance in the awe-inspiring pink mist that dominates the false sky in Nokron. I also am under the impression that Astel attacked only Nokron, since it's implied in his remembrance he only attacked one of the eternal cities. We also find the coloured sky only in Nokron and not in Nokstella. Coincidentally, the only other place we find this coloured sky is the arena in which we fight Astel, implying that Astel leaves no distinct mark where he is present. We also know that Astel is capable of teleporting, since he does this in his boss battle. If Astel did only attack Nokron, it doesn't explain why the inhabitants of Nokstella are found dead. Perhaps the Shifra aqueduct in Nokron was destroyed by Astel, cutting off the fresh water supply, and the remaining Noks died of terminal dehydration. Or perhaps the destruction of Nokron was too much to bear for the Noks. It's possible they even thought their greatest asset, the Fingerslayer blade, was lost in the destruction. Regardless, both cities are in ruins, and Astel is responsible. Whilst there is no direct evidence to link Astel's destruction of the Nox people to the Greater Will, I think it's too coincidental for the Greater Will not to be involved. After the creation of the highly treasonous weapon, the Fingerslayer blade, the Greater Will decided enough was enough and sent Astel to annihilate the Eternal Cities, and most importantly, the Nox. This might explain why we find the dead corpses of the inhabitants in such pain before their death. One can only imagine the true horror of seeing Astel, natural born of the void, ripping through the starry night. It seems only a creature of ill omen is truly capable of wiping out an entire race of people. I think it's also telling that Astel is found guarding the elevator that provides access to the Moonlight Altar, the area needed to complete the Age of Stars ending. Astel's position here might have been a deliberate act by the Greater Will, preventing any Tarnished who are trying to help Ranni the Witch. We have finally come to the end of our exploration of the eternal cities of Nokron and Nokstella. The Nox were dealt a cruel fate at the hands of the Greater Will, but like with any civilization, if status quo is challenged, then a no-mercy policy is applied to the challengers. The Nox were said challengers, and their culture dictated the lands between deserved an Age of Stars and the Moon. Coming into direct conflict with the Greater Will, nothing would stop the Nox from achieving their mission except the frightening Astel, natural born of the Void. Astel destroyed the Nox civilization, and after his attack, nothing but a few precious relics remained. The cities themselves had become nothing more than a husk. Now the dead Nox remain frozen in time, and the Eternal Cities serve as a reminder to not invoke the ire of the Greater Will.